The ballroom glowed with sterile elegance. Glass chandeliers like suspended galaxies, polished floors reflecting shoes that had never touched public pavement, and voices echoing through the vaulted ceilings in effortless, curated laughter. Delaney Rhodes adjusted the black dress Talia had made her borrow, form-fitting, backless, far too sleek for her comfort, and tried not to show how out of place she felt. She stood near the bar, clutching a half-empty glass of champagne she had no intention of finishing, and watched as Chicago's wealthiest circled one another like bored sharks at a feeding tank. This wasn't her world. It never had been. Not even when her father had been one of them. Back when the Rhodes name was spoken with respect in design circles, when his architectural firm was still thriving, before Hale Design Group had bought out his contracts and bled his company dry during a so-called market correction. No one in this room remembered Douglas Rhodes. And if they did, they didn't care. She had agreed to come only because Talia insisted, and because her rent was 3 weeks late, and the catering gig she'd picked up canceled last minute. Now she was just another nameless guest at a charity gala thrown by Hale Design itself, surrounded by people who had never skipped a meal they didn't plan to skip. Talia appeared at her side with a wicked grin, her curls piled high and her lipstick unapologetically red. "You're standing too still," she whispered. "People will think you're waiting for security to escort you out." "I'm trying not to spill this $12 mistake on someone's rented tux," Delaney replied under her breath. Talia raised an eyebrow. "You know what would fix that?" "I don't want to know." "Too bad. A dare." Delaney gave her a sidelong look. "What are we, 15? Talia leaned in, playful but dangerous. "You remember how we used to get through those god-awful winter dances? You always picked truth. Tonight, we change the narrative." "No. Too late. I dare you to kiss the coldest man in this room." Delaney blinked. "What?" Talia didn't blink. "You heard me. Coldest man. Full kiss. No escape. No apologies." "I'm going to kill you." "You won't," she said sweetly, and pointed subtly across the room. "He's right there." Delaney followed her gaze, and her breath caught. Standing near one of the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, with a drink untouched in one hand and the other shoved in his pocket, was Sutton Hale. Black suit, white shirt, no tie. Hair dark and neat, jaw clenched in permanent disapproval. Even across the room she could feel the intensity of his presence. He wasn't mingling. He wasn't smiling. He was surveying. The man whose firm had absorbed her father's life's work like it was a failed acquisition. The man whose last interview she'd read included the quote, "Architecture should be efficient, not sentimental." The man who made headlines for being brilliant, ruthless, and pathologically single. And he was looking right at her. "No way," she whispered. Talia grinned wider. "You said you were done hiding. You said you wanted to live." "I meant like, try rock climbing, not professional suicide." "You got 30 seconds, Talia said, then vanished into the crowd before Delaney could respond. Delaney stared down at her glass, then took a long, defiant sip. She'd lived her whole life doing the right thing, working 2 jobs, selling her art in street fairs just to pay bills, watching people like Sutton Hale profit from dismantling everything she once called home. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was the heat in the room, or maybe she was just done with being afraid of people who didn't even know her name. She walked across the ballroom without breaking stride. He didn't move. He didn't even blink. Just watched her approach, unreadable. "Hi," she said when she reached him. His gaze flicked once to her face, then back to her eyes. "Hello. I'm supposed to kiss you," she said, pulse thudding in her neck. A beat of silence. "Am I part of a game I didn't agree to?" he asked, tone dry, but not unkind. "Truth or dare? Blame my friend." Another pause. A tiny twitch at the corner of his mouth. Amusement? Curiosity? Then he said, "Far be it from me to sabotage tradition." And just like that, she leaned in. The kiss should have been brief. Stupid. Just a brush to say she did it. But the moment their lips met, something shifted. He didn't pull back. Didn't hesitate. Instead, he responded, controlled, deliberate, his hand brushing lightly against her waist. It was nothing like a party stunt. It was deliberate and slow and far too intimate for a room full of strangers. She felt the heat of it in her knees, her spine, her lungs. When she pulled back, breathless and stunned, he was still watching her. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. Delaney. He nodded once. Delaney, good. Now I know who I'll be thinking about for the rest of the night. And with that, Sutton Hale turned, drink still untouched, and walked away, leaving Delaney standing in the middle of the ballroom, heart racing, lips tingling, and the faint terrifying sense that she had just made a mistake she'd never be able to undo. The morning after the gala, Delaney woke up with a dry mouth, an aching neck from sleeping sideways on her couch, and the disorienting memory of the previous night looping in her head, like a song she couldn't turn off. She sat up slowly, blinking against the harsh light filtering through her windows, and immediately groaned when she remembered what she'd done, what she'd said, what she'd kissed. Sutton Hale. God, what was she thinking? She pulled a blanket around her shoulders and stumbled to the kitchen, where the smell of slightly burnt coffee greeted her, a Talia special. Her roommate stood at the counter in an oversized t-shirt, scrolling through her phone with that too casual expression Delaney had learned to fear. Morning, Talia said brightly, not looking up. Delaney narrowed her eyes. Why do you sound like you already know something? Talia turned the phone toward her without answering. You might want to see this. Delaney squinted at the screen. At first, it looked like any other gossip column headline. Ice King melts. Her stomach dropped before she even finished reading the subheading. Exclusive. Hale Design's notoriously untouchable CEO seen kissing mystery woman at fundraising gala. Oh my God, Delaney whispered. They actually published it. It's already been reposted like 40 times. There's even a slowed down clip on TikTok with dramatic violin music. You're basically a meme now. Delaney grabbed the phone and scrolled through the article. Mercifully, the angle of the video didn't catch her full face, but it didn't matter. People were already speculating, commenting, analyzing her posture, the way she leaned in, the way he responded. A thread on Twitter called it the most unexpectedly romantic 30 seconds of corporate America. This is bad, she muttered, handing the phone back. So bad, he probably thinks I planned the whole thing. Talia poured 2 mugs of coffee, handed one to Delaney, and leaned against the counter. Come on, the guy didn't exactly shove you away. If anything, he kissed you like it was a damn art form. That doesn't mean it meant anything, Delaney said, clutching the mug like it might anchor her. People like Sutton Hale don't just fall into kisses. They orchestrate their lives with military precision. I crashed his schedule like a pigeon flying into a glass building. Well, it's a very sexy building, Talia said with a shrug. You could have done worse. Delaney gave her a look and then collapsed into one of the kitchen chairs, pulling her knees to her chest. I need to go to work. Pretend like I'm not spiraling. You're spiraling with espresso, Talia said cheerfully, which makes you unstoppable. Despite the chaos of her thoughts, Delaney got dressed and headed to her job at the cafe like she did every other morning. It was a tiny place tucked between a flower shop and a yoga studio, with faded wood counters, mismatched mugs, and a handwritten chalkboard menu that never changed. She liked it there. It was grounding. No one cared who you kissed. They just wanted their coffee made right and fast. By noon, she was elbow deep in latte orders and distracted just enough to almost forget about the article, until the bell above the front door chimed and she looked up from the espresso machine to see Sutton Hale standing there, in a dark coat and gray scarf, looking like he had stepped directly out of a magazine spread and into her worst anxiety dream. He didn't smile, didn't look around. He just said, 2 shots of espresso, to go. Delaney nearly dropped the cup in her hand. Her fingers scrambled for composure. She turned away from him, her pulse hammering in her throat, and started the machine without saying a word. Behind her, she could feel the weight of his gaze like a second sun. Why was he here? What did he want? To yell at her for humiliating him? To threaten legal action? To demand she never step foot near his orbit again? She placed the finished espresso on the counter and met his eyes briefly. On the house for the PR boost. His expression didn't change. Are you always this sarcastic? Only when billionaires stalk me at work. That earned the ghost of a smirk. Hardly stalking, I wanted coffee. And to see if you were real. She blinked. Excuse me? I wasn't sure, he said, taking the cup. If the kiss was a fluke, a trick of the moment, I had to confirm. And, she asked, folding her arms. He studied her like she was a riddle he couldn't quite solve. Still undecided. With that, he turned and left. The door closed behind him with a soft jingle. Delaney stood frozen, heart pounding, hands trembling just slightly. Around her, the cafe returned to its normal rhythm. Customers chatting, the milk steamer hissing, the register beeping. But inside her, something had shifted. He'd come, not to scold, not to shame, but to see. And in the smallest, strangest way, it felt like the start of something she couldn't name yet, something she might not be able to stop. It had been 5 days since Sutton Hale walked into the cafe, and Delaney still hadn't figured out what unsettled her more. The fact that he'd shown up at all, or the fact that he hadn't returned since. At first, she had convinced herself that he was just passing through, that he had indulged a passing curiosity and moved on. That was what men like him did. Men who ruled the skyline with their names on the corners of buildings, who operated in curated penthouses and flew first class, not because they had to, but because they forgot there was anything else. Sutton Hale didn't do casual, repeat visits, especially not for a kiss at a gala that wasn't meant to mean anything, especially not for a barista who wore paint-stained shoes and tied her hair up with pencil holders. Still, each time the door chimed open, her head turned before she could stop herself. Every day she told herself she wasn't looking for him, that her chest wasn't tight with anticipation, and every day her body betrayed her. By Thursday, she had nearly convinced herself it was over, that whatever weird moment had passed between them had dissolved back into the reality from which it came. And then the email arrived. It was late afternoon and she was in the back room, helping the manager sort through a stack of invoices when her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. The address wasn't familiar, but the subject line stopped her cold. Private Commission Inquiry, Hale Design Group. Her throat tightened. She opened it cautiously, expecting legal jargon, maybe even a cease and desist. Instead, she read, Ms. Rhodes, I understand this is an unusual channel for contact, but I'd like to propose a meeting, a professional one. You were recommended to me as someone with a sharp artistic eye and an unconventional point of view. Hale Design is currently in the early concept phase for a new flagship property. I'd like to commission a custom mural for the atrium. Are you available to discuss the opportunity in person? S. Hale, there was no signature, no assistant's name, no legal attachments. Just that plain, direct message, like he'd typed it himself. Delaney stared at it for a full 2 minutes before she sat down on the floor, back against the wall, heart knocking in her ribs. She read it again, and again. It wasn't just unexpected, it was impossible. Sutton Hale didn't recommend artists. He hired entire firms. He bought finished pieces. He didn't commission people whose only public portfolio consisted of community center murals and weekend street fair installations. She called Talia. You have 10 seconds to tell me what's happening before I assume you've joined a cult. Talia answered, breathless as always. Delaney exhaled. He emailed me. There was a pause. He what? Sutton Hale emailed me, personally. He wants to talk about a commission. Talia made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a squeal. Oh my God, is this real? Did you check the email address? It's from the Hale domain. Did he say what kind of commission? He wants a mural for a building his company is designing. Jesus, Talia whispered. You kissed a man, and now you're painting his skyscraper. That's the fastest glow-up in the history of women. It's not a glow-up. It's weird. It's fate, honey. Lean in. Delaney didn't know if it was fate, but something about the message wouldn't let her go. The next morning, she arrived at the Hale Design headquarters 15 minutes early, clutching her sketch portfolio to her chest like armor. The building was everything she expected. Gleaming steel and glass, minimalist, unwelcoming. The lobby looked like it had been carved out of expensive stone and colder intentions. Everyone wore black. Everyone walked like they were late for something more important than breathing. The receptionist, a woman with perfectly sculpted eyebrows and a voice like static, checked her name and motioned her toward the private elevator. He's expecting you. Delaney stepped in. The ride was silent, her reflection staring back at her from the mirrored walls. She looked like she didn't belong. Jeans, boots, a tan jacket with a torn hem. No makeup. Hands ink smudged from a last-minute sketch. And yet here she was. The elevator opened to a sunlit hallway, and Sutton was waiting at the end of it. No assistant, no entourage, just him. He wore a charcoal shirt rolled at the sleeves, slacks, and a watch that probably cost more than her rent for the year. But he wasn't looking at her like a CEO evaluating a new hire. He was watching her like someone still trying to understand why she kept showing up in his thoughts at 2 a.m. "Ms. Rhodes," he said, and gestured for her to follow him. "Mr. Hale," she replied, cautious. He led her down the corridor into a private conference room. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a massive wooden table, and a digital layout of a building projected across the far wall. "This is the atrium," he said, clicking a remote. A new schematic slid into place. "It's the central hub of the new flagship. 5 stories tall, open design. We want something arresting, not polite, not expected." Delaney studied the space. It was stark, monolithic, clean lines and blank surfaces. It screamed power, not humanity. "You want me to disrupt this?" she said finally. He turned to her, intrigued. "Exactly. Why? Because every person who walks into this building will know the brand. But I want them to feel something first. I think you can do that." Delaney looked at him, not at his face, at the man behind it. "You don't want me for the mural," she said softly. "You want me because you can't stop thinking about the kiss." He didn't flinch. "Maybe. But I also think you're the most fearless artist I've seen in a decade." She wasn't expecting that. "I'm not flattered," she said after a long moment. "If this is a ploy, I walk." "It's not," he replied, calm and serious. "I want your art. And if it helps, I want your honesty too." She stood quietly, unsure whether to run or to reach for her sketchpad. Then she opened it and said, "D'accord, then let's talk about color." Delaney had never entered a workspace that felt so eerily sterile and alive at the same time. The Hale Design headquarters might have been built from stone and steel, but it pulsed with pressure. Everyone moved with purpose, their eyes locked on tablet screens, their words clipped and economical. Meetings were held behind glass walls that didn't muffle tension, but showcased it like theater. The air buzzed with the kind of ambition that didn't just want to succeed, it wanted to dominate. Sutton had assigned her a temporary studio on the 34th floor, one level below his own office, with views that spanned the lake and half the city skyline. It was a sharp contrast to the basement apartment where she did most of her painting, where damp concrete walls surrounded her, and the nearest view was a trash alley in the back of a parking meter. Here, sunlight spilled across clean white walls, and the air was crisp with the scent of eucalyptus and old money. It was surreal. The first few days, she kept her head down. She worked long hours sketching concepts for the atrium mural, testing palettes, storyboarding ideas, and trying not to wonder if Sutton was watching her. He rarely interfered, but she always had the sense that he knew exactly what she was doing and how fast. The only interruptions came in the form of perfectly polite emails from his assistant or handwritten notes delivered by junior staff with nervous smiles. Still, he lingered. He stopped by at odd times, never announced, never staying long. He didn't hover or question her work, but he asked precise things. "Why did you choose that curve? What's the story behind that shape? Does that red represent something, or is it just mood?" She answered him honestly, but she began to notice that he wasn't looking at the art. He was looking at her, listening, studying, memorizing. And the worst part was, she didn't hate it. One evening, long after most of the building had emptied, she was still working when she heard his voice behind her. "You don't use rulers," he said. She didn't turn. "Lines are more human when they're imperfect." He walked further into the room, his footsteps soft on the polished floor. "That's the opposite of what I was taught. I'm guessing a lot of things I do are the opposite of what you were taught." She turned then, expecting his usual calm exterior, but his eyes were tired. He had taken off his blazer, his shirt sleeves rolled back just like the first time they met in that conference room. And for the first time, he looked less like a CEO and more like a man who hadn't slept in a week. "You're different," he said simply. "This place has rules. You break them without realizing." "I'm not trying to be different," she said, dropping her brush into a glass of murky water. "I just don't belong here. That's what makes you valuable." "No," she said, facing him directly. "That's what makes me dangerous to your reputation. You don't want chaos in your brand identity. You want control, harmony, predictability." He stared at her, his expression unreadable. "I used to think that." Delaney raised an eyebrow. "And now?" He took a step closer, voice lower. "Now I think unpredictability might be the only honest thing left." The silence between them crackled. She stepped away, wiping her hands on a towel. You didn't come down here to talk about brushstrokes. No, he admitted. I didn't. He leaned against the edge of the table and looked out the window, the city lights flickering like distant stars. You're right. I can't stop thinking about it. The kiss. You. This. Then stop, she said too quickly. I tried, he answered, his voice almost amused. Trust me, I tried. Her heart thudded in her chest. This isn't smart, she said quietly. You're my employer. I'm temporary. This whole thing is already complicated. I'm not asking for simple, he said. I'm asking for real. Delaney turned back to the canvas, trying to ignore the way her hands were shaking slightly, the way her breath came faster. You don't get to ask for that, she said, her voice tight. You don't know what real even looks like. Then show me, he said. The words hung in the air like an exposed wire. She could feel him behind her, his presence warming the space even when they weren't touching. And she hated that part of her, wanted to lean into it, to drop the brush, to see what would happen if she just let go. But she didn't. Instead, she stepped aside and gestured toward the in-progress mural on the wall, a massive, abstract vision of red and charcoal and gold, raw and sharp, beautiful in the way broken things sometimes are when you stop trying to fix them. This is real, she said. It's messy, unfinished, loud. It makes people uncomfortable, and most of the time, no one even gets what it means. He looked at the painting, then at her. I get it, she scoffed. You think you do? I know I do, he said, his voice softer now. Because you just described me. That stopped her. She looked up at him and, for the first time, saw the fracture behind his perfect posture, the loneliness, the weariness of someone who had built every wall he could and still felt exposed. She didn't say anything else. She just picked up a clean brush, dipped it into gold paint, and handed it to him. Then add something. He blinked. What? If you get it, then contribute. Put a piece of yourself in it. He stared at her, at the brush, at the painting. Then he took it. And in that moment, Delaney knew something had changed. Not just in the project, not just between them, but in him. Because Sutton Hale had finally agreed to be part of something he couldn't control. It started with a photograph. Delaney hadn't even noticed the woman with the phone. She remembered stepping outside the Hale Design Building after a late meeting, laughing, really laughing, as Sutton said something dry about how one of his junior designers had confused Bauhaus with Beyoncé in a client presentation. She hadn't even touched him. He hadn't touched her. They were just standing close, comfortable, familiar. But the flash of the phone camera went unnoticed in the swirl of the city's evening noise, hidden behind the hum of taxis and the glow of street lamps. She didn't know about the photo until the next morning when she walked into the cafe where she used to work, stopping in to say hello, to feel normal for 5 minutes. And the barista behind the counter held up his phone before even greeting her. You're famous now, he said with a lopsided grin. The image was crisp, Sutton looking relaxed and, God help her, smiling. Delaney, head tilted slightly, mouth open mid-laugh, her hand loosely curled at her hip, looking at him like he was someone she had known forever. The caption beneath it, power couple or PR ploy. Hale spotted with mystery artist at HQ. The article was worse. Sensationalist, speculative, crawling with inaccuracies. It called her his new creative partner and possible girlfriend, throwing around phrases like office romance and unprofessional intimacy. Her name was mentioned, her work referenced, her background dragged through the digital gutter like a scavenger hunt. Within hours, her social media inboxes were flooded. Some curious, some hateful, some disturbingly invasive. Strangers debated whether she was talented or just lucky. Others compared her to Sutton's past rumored flings, dissected her appearance, questioned her motives. By lunchtime, 2 reporters had shown up at the cafe. Another had called her mother, and still she hadn't heard a word from Sutton. She stared at her phone all afternoon, waiting for it to buzz, for a message, a warning, anything. But there was silence, deafening, cold. By evening, she was pacing in her apartment, phone in one hand, wine glass in the other, adrenaline still coiled in her chest like a spring. Talia sat on the couch, watching her with a wary expression. He's probably dealing with PR fallout, Talia said, trying to sound calm. It's his company. It's his brand. He's a control freak. Maybe he's working out how to handle it. Delaney shook her head. No. If he really gave a damn, he would have said something, even a text. Maybe he's trying to protect you. By going silent? You don't protect someone by pretending they don't exist. Her phone finally rang at 9:37 p.m. It was a private number. She answered on the first ring. Hello? Delaney. His voice, low even, tired. She held her breath. You finally decided to call. I'm sorry, things got complicated. That's a pathetic excuse, and you know it. There was a pause. She could hear him breathing, could almost picture him at his desk. Suit jacket off, tie loosened, the city behind him as silent as he was now. They want me to issue a statement, he said quietly, to clarify the nature of our relationship, that it's professional only. Delaney closed her eyes. They, she repeated. My board, my investors, the press team. They're worried about appearances. And what do you want? She asked. He hesitated. I want to protect what we're building. This project, your work. I don't want to make it harder for you. She laughed, sharp and humorless. You think pretending we're nothing is going to make it easier for me? I think disappearing from the narrative might spare you from becoming tabloid bait. I already am tabloid bait, she snapped. Because of you. Because you kept showing up, kept pulling me into your orbit, acting like I mattered, until the moment it got inconvenient. I never said you didn't matter, he said, his voice clipped now. But you won't say that I do, she replied. Because that would cost you something. The line was quiet for a beat. Then, you're right. The honesty in those two words stung more than any excuse would have. Delaney didn't cry. She didn't yell. She simply said, if you can't say it, Sutton, then don't come near me again. And she hung up. The next morning, she didn't go to Hale Design. She emailed the assistant, told them she was stepping away from the mural project until further notice. She turned off her phone, took the train to the north side of the city and walked aimlessly through streets she hadn't visited in years. Eventually, she found herself in front of the old community center, where she'd painted her first mural. Just a splash of color and hope on a wall that had been gray for too long. She stared at it for a long time, peeling, faded, but still there, still hers. Later that week, she received a package. No sender listed. Inside was a sketchbook, her original one from the Hale project. Every page carefully preserved. On the inside cover, a single note in Sutton's handwriting. I wanted to own this. You reminded me not everything can be bought. Thank you for teaching me. No apology, no promises, just truth. And for the first time in days, she let herself sit down, take a deep breath, and feel the weight of what she'd chosen, not the heartbreak. The integrity. She'd walked away from a man who couldn't choose her publicly, and somehow that made her feel more whole than any kiss ever could. The following week stretched out in strange silence, each day echoing with what Delaney wasn't saying aloud. She returned to her normal life, or at least the version of it that existed before Sutton Hale stepped into her orbit and cracked it wide open. Mornings were filled with sketching and errands, quiet time in her tiny studio with nothing but the hum of a portable fan and the scratch of charcoal on canvas. She unplugged from social media, deleted half her inbox without reading, and told Talia she didn't want to hear another word about Sutton, the photo, or her momentary status as the internet's favorite underdog. But her hands wouldn't stop drawing him. It started unintentionally, just a shape at first, a tilt of a jawline, the severe curve of a brow. Then more, the tension in his shoulders, the guardedness in his posture, the fire he tried to bury behind polite detachment. Sutton Hale kept appearing in shadows and outlines, in rough sketches that ended up torn and crumpled on her floor. It infuriated her. She didn't want to immortalize him in her work. She didn't want to remember how it felt to stand too close to him, or the way his voice dropped when he said something real, unfiltered. But art didn't care about what she wanted. It spilled out anyway. 3 weeks after she walked away, she received a call from an unfamiliar number. This time, it wasn't Sutton. It was a woman named Regina Moore, a sharply professional voice on the other end of the line, who introduced herself as the director of a new nonprofit initiative called Bricklight, a community-based urban development project focusing on accessible public art in underserved neighborhoods. She said her board had reviewed Delaney's past murals and community installations, and they were interested in having her join as lead visual consultant. They wanted her to design a citywide mural campaign, several pieces in areas being revitalized through architectural restoration. Delaney was stunned. She hadn't applied to anything. She hadn't even updated her website. "How did you find me?" she asked, guarded. There was a brief pause before Regina replied, "We were referred by someone familiar with your recent work at Hale Design. He said your vision was the only thing strong enough to give concrete its soul." Delaney's throat went tight. She thanked Regina, promised to review the proposal, and hung up the call with trembling fingers. She stood in her apartment for nearly 10 minutes after, phone still in hand, staring at the wall like it might offer clarity. Sutton had sent her work, not her name. He hadn't claimed credit. He hadn't reached out. He had just opened a door and stepped back. 2 days later, she visited the first site for the new mural, a weathered elementary school wall in a quiet neighborhood on the south side. The building had chipped brick, barred windows, and a playground with one broken swing. It didn't look like hope, but as she stood there, sketch pad in hand, she saw it, the potential, the contrast, the space that needed color. That night, she painted for hours, not for Hale, not for investors or clients or press, but for herself, for the children who would pass by that wall every morning and maybe, just maybe, feel something because of it. By the end of the week, she had sent back a full proposal to Regina's team, sketches attached, a note at the bottom that read, "Concrete with soul. Let's see if we can prove him right." She hadn't heard from Sutton directly, and she didn't expect to. But a week later, she received another message. This one handwritten, sent with no return address. It was a single sentence on Hale Design stationery, penned in careful black ink. "Sometimes stepping away is the only way I know how to come closer." She stared at it for a long time, read it over and over. There were no promises in it, no apologies. But she didn't want apologies anymore. She wanted growth. And if Sutton Hale had learned to speak without walls, even just a little, maybe that was enough for now. The mural project began quickly. She met with city officials, community members, and local artists. She coordinated color schemes with architects and sketched outlines late into the night. She stopped checking her phone for his name, not because she had stopped caring, but because she no longer waited for permission to move forward. One afternoon, as she was chalking the outline of a sunrise onto a newly primed wall, a voice behind her said, "You missed a corner." Her body tensed. She turned slowly, and there he was. Sutton stood beside a small stack of paint cans, hands in his coat pockets, watching her like he had never stopped. He looked tired but lighter somehow. No tie. Just a soft blue shirt, a coat, and a vulnerability in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I thought you hated unpredictability," she said, not moving. "I still do," he replied, "but I hate silence more." Delaney exhaled slowly. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see what you're building." He paused. "And to ask if I could help." "You want to help paint?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "I brought brushes," he said, motioning to a small canvas bag at his feet. "And coffee." She narrowed her eyes. "You're serious?" "I'm trying to be." She walked toward him, slowly, cautiously, her heart thudding. "Why now?" He looked at her, not past her, not through her, at her. "Because I watched you walk away from me and still move forward. Because you reminded me what it means to stand for something without needing to own it. And because every day I spent trying not to think about you, I failed." Delaney felt the tension melt in her shoulders, not because everything was perfect now, but because his words were finally honest. She took the bag of brushes from his hand, pulled one out, and handed it to him. "We're painting a sunrise. Don't ruin it." He smiled, small, real. "I'll follow your lead." And side by side, without needing to explain what they were to each other, they began again. One color, one wall, one truth at a time. The mural was finished 3 weeks later, just as summer stretched its fingers fully across the city, coating the air in the soft weight of heat and pollen. The school's exterior wall, once cracked and forgotten, had transformed into a sweep of color so bright it caught the attention of anyone passing within a block. The design began with deep indigo along the bottom, a rising tide of warm oranges, bold yellows, and streaks of crimson pushing upward into a sunburst that spanned the upper corner of the wall. In the center of it all stood the silhouette of a child with their arms stretched wide. Not asking for flight, but embracing the sky like they already owned it. It wasn't signed. Delaney didn't believe in putting her name on things like this. It belonged to the neighborhood now, to the children who would walk past it every day, to the parents who might feel, if only for a moment, that someone remembered they existed. But as much as it wasn't hers alone, it was undeniably hers in heart, soul, and sweat. Sutton had come to the site nearly every day. At first he hovered, awkward and clearly out of place, standing in tailored clothes that picked up chalk dust and city grime. But he adapted. He traded his dress shoes for sneakers, rolled his sleeves like the rest of the crew, and eventually, when no one was looking, helped fill in a corner of the wall with soft strokes of yellow. He never acted like he belonged there, but he never acted like he deserved more either. That, Delaney thought, was the real change. They spoke more in gestures than in declarations. He brought coffee without asking how she took it, because he remembered. She handed him brushes without telling him what to do, because she trusted him now. Their silences grew more comfortable, their glances more frequent. There was something grounding about building something together that had nothing to do with profit or portfolios. Then on the day they finished, as the last outline dried beneath the sun, the school's principal invited them inside for lemonade and sandwiches. Children gathered around Delaney, some shy, some bold, asking if they could paint something next. One small girl, maybe 7, tugged on Sutton's sleeve and said, "Are you her husband?" He blinked, startled, and looked at Delaney. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The girl added, "Because she's the boss. You help her, right?" He crouched to meet her eyes. "Yes," he said after a beat. "I help her." The girl nodded, satisfied, and skipped away. Delaney watched him, a small smile tugging at her mouth. Later, as the crowd thinned and the crew packed up their supplies, Sutton lingered by the wall, hands in his pockets. She walked over to him, wiping her hands on a rag, and stood beside him without saying anything. The mural glowed in the late afternoon light, colors deepening with every passing minute. "She was right, you know," she said finally. "About what?" he asked, still facing forward. "I am the boss." He turned to her then, a rare light in his eyes. "I never doubted it." They shared a quiet moment, the city softening around them. Then he spoke again, this time slower. "I did something." Delaney tensed slightly. "Good something or bad something?" "Not sure yet," he said. "I stepped down from my CEO role last week. Knox is taking over day-to-day operations. I'm staying on the board, but I won't be running Hale Design anymore." She stared at him. "You stepped down? Why?" He turned toward her fully now. "Because I finally realized that legacy isn't about control. It's about contribution. I built buildings. You build meaning. I want to learn how to do both." The honesty in his voice struck her deeply. For the first time, he wasn't announcing or offering. He was confessing. "So what now?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've never not worked. I've never not had an agenda. But I think I'd like to start building things that don't need my name on them. With you, if you'll let me." Delaney looked at him. This man who had once terrified her with how precise and untouchable he was. Now he stood before her stripped of armor, offering nothing but himself. She exhaled. "You always talk like you're pitching a merger." He winced and she laughed. Then she stepped closer. "Here's the thing," she said. "I don't need a partner. I don't need saving. But I also don't want to pretend like this doesn't mean something. You matter to me. That doesn't mean you own me. It means you show up even when it's messy, especially when it's messy." He nodded slowly. "I can do that. I want to do that." And then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, folded paper, worn at the edges. "I kept this," he said, handing it to her. "From the first day I watched you paint. I made a note." She unfolded the paper. It read in tight script, "She doesn't paint walls. She paints doors." Delaney looked up at him, heart full, voice catching. "That's the most romantic thing a control freak has ever said to me." He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "Then let me walk through one of those doors. With you." She didn't answer with words. She reached up, curled her hand behind his neck, and kissed him, quietly, fully, without hesitation. It wasn't a dare this time. It wasn't a statement. It was a promise. When they pulled apart, she looked at the mural one last time, at the colors burning into the sky like a sunrise refusing to be ignored. And she whispered, Let's see what we build next. Autumn crept into the city slowly, as if reluctant to disrupt the rhythm summer had established. Those long, warm days filled with street music and wet sidewalks, and the quiet comfort of knowing who you were waking up next to. But by October, the leaves began to curl at the edges. The light thinned in the mornings, and people carried themselves with a kind of quiet urgency, as if something was ending whether they were ready or not. Delaney stood in the converted warehouse space that now served as the central studio for Bricklight's newest initiative. The inside had been transformed from an abandoned metalwork shop into a humming creative engine. Rolling scaffolds, giant canvases stacked along the brick walls, rows of paint supplies in metal bins, and a long communal table covered in rough drafts and half-finished models. She'd been offered a permanent position as creative director, though she wasn't sure she liked the title, and was already mentoring 3 local artists from the neighborhood who had never before been paid to do what they loved. She was working late that night. The others had gone home, the space dim except for the warm overhead lights that flickered every so often. She was reworking a concept sketch for a mural planned outside a women's shelter, a swirling image of vines wrapping around a silhouette, protective but strong, tangled and beautiful in its defiance. The kind of piece that demanded you look closer before you understood what it meant. Sutton arrived just before 10, his arrival no longer a surprise but still something that made her heart twitch a little, even after all these weeks. He let himself in with the key she'd given him, not with ceremony but with quiet respect, the way someone enters a place they know they have to earn, again and again. He wore a simple sweater, navy blue, sleeves pushed up. There was a streak of paint on one of his forearms and she couldn't help but grin. "Studio time or sabotage?" she asked, not looking up from her sketch. He dropped a small bag of food on the table beside her. "Peace offering." "Tie." She put down her pencil. "Sold." They sat together on the floor, legs crossed, cartons open between them. This had become their ritual, take-out dinners in places neither of them fully understood how to call home yet. He always ordered too much. She always stole the last dumpling, and they always, eventually, ended up talking about things that mattered. Tonight, though, the silence lingered longer than usual. Finally, he said, "I talked to my father last week." Delaney looked up, chopsticks paused midair. "He was not surprised that I stepped away. He thinks it's temporary. He thinks I'll get tired of doing idealistic projects and come back when I'm ready to be serious again." She put her food down gently. "I'm guessing you didn't tell him about helping paint a tree on the side of a middle school last Saturday." Sutton gave a dry laugh. "No, he'd consider that a full-blown midlife crisis." "Did it feel like one?" "No, it felt like breathing." He glanced at her then, his expression softer than usual. "You were right. About the control, about how I used it like armor. Even when I thought I was doing good, I was still building walls, not windows." Delaney shifted slightly, knees brushing his. "People build what they think will keep them safe." "I don't want safe anymore," he said. "I want connected, messy, real." She stared at him for a long moment, then reached into her sketchpad and pulled something out. It was a folded paper, frayed at the corners. He opened it slowly. It was the first concept she'd ever drawn for the atrium mural at Hale Design, the one that never got used, the one with all the rawness and grief and hope she couldn't explain to anyone else. "You kept this?" he asked, surprised. "I thought about throwing it out, about forgetting all of it. But that felt dishonest. This was part of the story. Even the unfinished chapters." He traced a line on the paper with his thumb. "I want to finish something with you. Not just murals, not just community projects. A life." She felt her breath catch. "I'm not good at asking," he said, quieter now, "but I'm trying to learn." He reached into his pocket, not with the nervous flourish of a man performing, but with the steadiness of someone who had waited to be sure. The ring he pulled out wasn't flashy. It wasn't custom cut or heavy with diamonds. It was simple, gold, slightly imperfect in its curve, like it had been shaped by hand. "This was my mother," he said. "She used to wear it when she was still painting. I found it in an old drawer. I want you to have it, not because I want to claim you or fix you or make you into someone else, but because when I think about the kind of life I want, one that leaves color, one that makes room for breath, you're already in it." Delaney didn't answer right away. Her eyes welled, her hands went still. "You don't have to say anything now," he added quickly. "This isn't a test. She shook her head. No, I want to. I thought I'd stop believing in things like this. And now? She looked at him. This man who once couldn't say her name out loud when it cost him something, now sitting on the floor of her studio, offering not a fairy tale, but a future that looked exactly like the life they were already building. Now I believe in what we make together, she said. He slipped the ring onto her finger, slow and deliberate. It fit, not perfectly, but closely enough, like something worth growing into. They sat there for a while after that, surrounded by the smell of lemongrass and paint, the hum of the city filtering through cracked windows. There were no big declarations, no dramatic speeches, just the shared knowledge that their story hadn't ended with a kiss on a dare. It had only just begun. And when Delaney picked up her pencil again that night, she drew two hands, not holding, not grasping, but painting side by side. Different colors, same wall, a story not yet finished.